Hello, my friends. Today I'm going to address the question of whether or not you should buy a PC or new PC components, memory or GPUs or anything. And the answer is a definite yes, no, maybe, it depends. Full disclosure, I've just bought a new graphics card, and I'll explain the reasons in a minute, and the reasons will be pertinent to you too. So, first of all, why would you buy a new PC? Well, the main reason is because your old one has died, or because you want improved performance on what you're getting. So there are two ways that you can improve performance, two primary ways, and then a kind of ancillary third way is you can improve the CPU, you can improve the GPU, and the third helper is the amount of memory you have. So the CPU is the processor that will handle how your software runs. Basically, it's what you load DAS or Blender or Poser into, and the GPU is to a certain extent where your scenes load into, but also that is going to be the component of your system which basically is responsible for rendering if you have your system set up. Now, if you're rendering Firefly on Poser or 3D Light on DAS, you're probably rendering with a CPU. So I don't really know an awful lot about CPU models. I have a Threadripper. You might have a Core 9 or a Core 7 or something like that. Or you could have one of the AMD CPUs. They're an important component of your system, but hopefully you've moved on to iRay or Superfly rendering, and you're rendering with the GPU. If you're rendering with the GPU, the only one that really counts is anything from nvidia. Um, you get massively improved performance with a GPU over a CPU, even using AMD GPUs, which used to be cheaper, not so much now. But to be honest, optics is the only way to really render on your PC in terms of performance. So, why would you want to improve buy a new system? Because you want better performance, or because your system has died? If your system's died, you have no choice about buying. Basically, if you use a PC daily, you're going to have to buy a system no matter what. You could possibly buy second hand, but we'll talk about that in another video. But either way, you're going to have to get something. Now, you're undoubtedly aware of the fact that memory and GPU prices are massively skewed at the moment by AI or artificial intelligence. What's happening is that they're basically the companies that make GPUs, primarily nvidia, are finding that the same amount of silicon or the same GPU chip earns them many orders of magnitude more sold to professional companies who are going to put them into AI processing centers. So AI uses NVIDIA's multi-core CUDA technology to evaluate millions and millions of I guess of different branching cases to evaluate AI. So if you give it just to super simplify, if I said guess a number from 1 to 1,000,000, the more guesses that I can do simultaneously, the more threads that I can do, the faster I'm going to reach that number. Now extrapolate that across what's known as large language models, where it's evaluating all the possibilities for something you've said. So perhaps you might say, tell me about the best thing to invest money into, and it's going to go away and it's going to look at all the related statements to do with investment and try and evaluate to come to a conclusion about what's the best way to invest your money. And it can hallucinate as well, which is where it just fabricates complete nonsense answers. That's kind of a by the by. All you need to know is that graphics cards are being hampered because GPUs are being put into data centers because they're just millions and millions of cards are going into these centers. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely definitely a bubble, just like the dot-com boom and Enron before that, where there's just a massively disproportionate amount of money being poured into it, and it will burst. But the trouble is that none of the investors in it can afford to let somebody else get a first mover advantage on discovering AI in a way that's financially viable, which it isn't at the moment. But the bad news is that what that means is that GPUs have gone up in price significantly, or at least have not taken the normal downward trajectory of prices. Normally you'd get a graphics card, it'd be out for a couple of years, and the price would slowly trickle downwards over time. And it's also massively ramped the price of memory. Memory prices are currently around about between 100% and 300% higher than they were a year ago. So you can see that from one perspective, it's an absolutely awful time to buy any PC components, or in fact anything that uses memory. So that also includes phones, strangely enough. So from one perspective, it's a really, really awful time to buy. And to make things worse, the fabrication plants, that's the places where the chips are made for NVIDIA, such as TMC in Taiwan, have a maximum capacity of how many silicon bits they can make and how many chips. And so they also can afford to put their prices up. And as a result, NVIDIA has said that they're possibly, this is a rumour at the moment, but that it's suggested that they'll be reducing output of GPUs by 40% this year, 2026. So that obviously will have a knock-on effect on prices because there's more people that want the GPUs for PCs than there will be available. And now there's a rumour which is even more concerning, which is that NVIDIA is now going to increase their flagship 5090 product from the current price of £2,000 to £3,000 up to £5,000, $5,000, sorry. Now, these are just rumours, but I would suggest that NVIDIA has been trying to reposition their flagship product as a luxury product ever since before COVID. When COVID happened and there was a limited availability, their cards went up to $2,000, and they've never really come back down much below that. We've had when COVID came out, the 3090 was the current generation flagship, or 3090 Ti, and then after COVID, we had the 4090, and now we have the 5090 series. And the 5090, as I say, runs somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 for a regular card, or pounds actually for a regular card. So if they genuinely do limit the amount of cards they put out, that will definitely have a knock-on effect on prices or even availability. And obviously, if they reduce production by 40%, perhaps because they want to use the silicon to make AI cards instead, then that will lead to price gouging prices as well. And add to that the fact that their cards require memory, not just the DRAM that goes into, or DDR that goes into these data centers, but DDR on board the GPUs. And that is in very short supply. And one of the three producers of memory has now said that they're not going to sell directly to consumers anymore. They're only going to sell to professionals where they can charge a higher premium. So all in all, there's a massive squeeze on prices, and whenever that happens, the prices go up. So this brings us to the question, is now a good time to buy or not? And whichever way you go, you're taking a gamble. the gamble is that if you buy now, you're doing so on the understanding that it will be a long time before you can buy again, or that prices will just continue to escalate. So even though now's a terrible time to buy, it's the best terrible time to buy. Or the other gamble is that these rumours about GPUs going up by 40%, production going down by 40%, and prices going up as high as 5,000 for the flagship. No word on what the other GPUs in the series will do. The 5080, which is about $1,000, the 5070, which I believe is $700 or $800, down to the 5050, I believe, is the entry level. There's a full gamut of cards there for gamers, but if you're rendering, you really want the most powerful card that you're willing to pay for, because every step you go up the stack, I believe it's called, the range of cards, every step you go up is a minute or 10 minutes or 15 minutes that you save on your rendering. So, should you buy? Well, it depends on your patience, it depends on your budget, and the biggest thing is it depends on which way you tend on the gamble of whether things are going to go down or going to go up. So there are two factors weighing here. Undoubtedly, AI is a bubble. It's an unprecedented bubble that is currently worth 99% of the US economy, and if it didn't exist, the US economy would barely be expanding at all. And the US government has invested massively into this to help these companies. They've bought shares in Intel, and nvidia has bought shares in Intel, and nvidia has invested in the government, so bribed Donald Trump. But the fact is that currently there's no AI service which is running at a profit. In fact, they're all running at a significant loss. And that can't continue indefinitely. Investors are starting to get nervous. They're taking their money and investing it in tangible assets such as gold and silver rather than these AI cards, because they're starting to get antsy. Although there are still investors putting money in, it's a bit like any Ponzi scheme. It may be a Ponzi scheme, but if you get out before that scheme is discovered and the main investors pull their money out, you can still make money. And the same with the AI bubble. If you get out while it's still riding high or at the top of the bubble, you're fine. If you wait until the bubble bursts, then you lose everything. So the question is how soon the bubble will burst and what will happen. The first thing that will happen is that there will be millions of graphics cards in data centers that no longer are useful for the purpose that they were put there. But they're pro cards, so you can't use them for games. You might possibly be able to repurpose them for graphics, but they're not really consumer cards. So there'll be all of these cards laying there, which, if we're lucky, will be recycled. Most likely, they're just dead. What will happen is they'll be obsolete and they'll be useless to anyone, and it'll just be what's called e-waste, electronics waste. And if that happens this year, as I suspect it's going to happen, and I think that OpenAI is going to be the first company to go, because they're massively over leveraged in this field, and they've invested. They've committed to trillions of dollars worth of investments, but have only made a very small number of billions of dollars of profit. And you can't continue committing to, if you had a credit card and you borrowed a million dollars on your credit card, but your income's only 1,000, you pretty soon end up in court. And that's exactly analogous to where OpenAI is, except that whether or not they'll end up in court, who knows. I suspect they'll all just declare bankruptcy. But they're kind of caught in this cycle that they can't afford to blink and back down, because possibly one of their rivals will discover decent AI before they do, or if there's some way to run AI, to have a power source for AI which is very, very cheap, such as something renewable, such as solar or wind or water, hydroelectric, then that's going to change the equation. But it's extremely unlikely because there's been investment going into these energy sources for decades, and it doesn't just happen overnight just because they need it for power stations. And there's no way that they're going to get nuclear power stations built quickly enough, although it's now claimed that they need 100 nuclear power stations just in America for the needs of these AI data centers. So it's definitely going to burst. But the question is, can you afford to wait till that happens, and how long will it take for the ripple effects for that to happen? So I have gambled on the fact that it's not, even if it happens this year, the ripple won't happen to GPUs for at least another few years. And so I've decided to buy a decent GPU now, and if I get a few years use out of it, then so be it. It has a 3-year warranty. Beyond that, who knows? I've never had a graphics card die on me, so fingers crossed this one won't either. On the other hand, you might think that the AI bubble is going to burst very quickly, and that the ripple effect and nvidia's recent rumours are designed to create hype for their products, panic buying, because they know that the AI bubble is going to burst. They're invested in the bubble in terms of being invested in AI companies, but they're also, to use the analogy that keeps on getting used, they're the ones selling shovels in a gold rush. In a gold rush, most people didn't get rich off the gold, but the companies that did get rich were the ones selling their shovels to the people who didn't get rich. So they win either way. So just to have a look here, we've got all of these AI data centers, and people are asking, will the bubble burst in 2026? And they're talking about red flags. I mean, if you look into the subject even a little bit, it seems almost inevitable to me that they just, you can't continue to borrow against a loss at the scale that these companies are doing. So here's a company from How To Geek, and they're suggesting why you need to buy your next PC right now before prices explode. I suspect prices are going to continue to go up anyway, just because there's with weather systems, they talk about a delay between cause and effect, and I think that there's the same thing happening here. There are RAM companies coming on board in China who are making new RAM, but you don't just make a RAM fabrication plant overnight. The time it takes for that to trickle down, even with China's absolutely astronomically fast manufacturing, it is still a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years before these RAM companies come on board. So I think it was SC Hynix was the RAM company who got out of making RAM. I can't remember who it was now, but it was one of the 3 big companies. So I guess they could instantly turn back to the consumer market, but that's just one of the components, as I said. And the RAM production. Just to give you some context, OpenAI actually bought all of the RAM on the planet. Oh, I think it was 70%. They committed to buy 70% of the RAM on the planet for the next year. And not because they need it, but just because it prevents their opposition from buying any. And it's also been shown that there are data centers with millions of cards, GPUs, sitting there unused because they can't get the power to run them. So these companies are playing with astronomical budgets. They're just taking a huge gamble on this, and compared to the money they have to throw around, consumers really don't have any chance of affecting things. All we can just do is sit there and wait for it all to come crashing down. But for right now, if you need a PC, or if you need the power of a new PC, so obviously if your PC's dead, you have to buy at whatever price it is. And as I say, second hand is a possibility. You could buy, 40 series GPUs if you can find them, and they're still expensive, still running at $1,000, even second hand on eBay. But it's a bit more palatable than 2 or 3 thousand, and at least nvidia doesn't control the price of those. It's just whatever the market price is for second hand stuff. And if we look here, so we look at an RTX 5070, which is a pretty decent card. I would suggest that this probably would want to be your entry level card for 3D rendering. They've got 12 gigs of RAM on board, which is really the absolute lowest amount that you could tolerate. Although the recommendation from all three companies is not the recommendation, but the minimum is as low as 4. Really, I wouldn't go less than 12. The card I've just bought has got 32. My previous card has got 24, and I don't often use all 24 gigs on my 3090, but when you do, it's nice to have it there before it has to start shipping those tasks off to your hard drive or whatever. And then here's the 5090, and this is the one. The prices for the sub 5090 cards has actually very slowly crept down over the last 6 months. So not an awful time to buy, and these there's deals to be got here on the 5070 or the 5080. This is Scan UK, but obviously wherever you buy Newegg or Micro Central or whatever. But the 5090, despite the usual trend downwards, the 5090 has stayed high and is now creeping back up again. So these cards are about £200 more than they were. That's about $300 more than they were 3 months ago. So, what is your appetite for patience? How long are you prepared to wait? Because it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, there's one more factor that plays in here. Well, just a quick look here. We've got DDR5 RAM, and this here is over twice the price it was. In fact, DDR4, when I bought my system in three years ago, DDR4 was £200 for 32 gigs, and now it's £400 for 32 gigs. So really, in fact, it's almost £400 for DDR5. But there's one more factor playing into this, and this is let me just quickly look this up. What's it called? Gforce Online? I don't know what it's called now, but it's Gforce Now. So this is a service offered by nvidia, and this is the thing that really made me concerned and buy now. Gforce Now is a service whereby, rather than having a PC at home, you rent time on their PCs. At the moment, it's for games. Excuse me. So their top service costs $20 a month for a 4070, I believe it is. Let me have a look. So what happens is you connect to their service and you get 4080. So that's second highest of the previous generation stack. So you get 4080, and they try and bullshit it's the same as 5080. That's nonsense. It's a complete lie. But you pay £20 a month. I think it's the same in dollars, and then you get to use their system. So you just basically have a crappy PC, and you basically connect online, and their computer is what does all the processing. So you can have a really bad system at home, and it's basically just acting as a monitor and an internet connection. And this flagship, as I say, costs £20, $20. You can game for 8 hours at a time, but they've just changed their terms of service. So it used to be, I believe, unlimited time per month in blocks of no more than 8 hours, and now they've just reduced that to 100 hours a month, which is about 3 hours a day. And the fact that they put that limitation on there at a time when they're about to be squeezing the amount, allegedly, the time they're going to be squeezing the availability of GPUs is somewhat concerning, because it makes it seem like they're pushing people towards this service, and they want to limit how much use people can get from this service. And that this change of terms kind of dovetails with the fact that the other side of things are true, in terms of the restrictions on how much, how many, what percentage of cards are going to be available, and also how much they want to charge for their flagship. And there's one more thing that feeds into this, is that Gforce or nvidia doesn't just manufacture cards themselves. They sell chips or reference boards to third-party hardware vendors, such as Asus and other companies. And then what these companies do is they configure it according to how they want to do it, and then they brand it for themselves, and then they sell at whatever price they want to sell at. And in the past, what they would do, these reference boards included memory on board. And now NVIDIA are starting to ship boards that don't have memory on board, which means that the suppliers now have to source their own memory, which puts them at a significant disadvantage. So this implies that the availability of memory, even to a vast vendor like NVIDIA, was so limited that they could no longer include it on the boards that they sell to the people who make their money. These vendors paid NVIDIA for their cards, and now they can't. It's ironic that their AI price gouging, I guess you could say, that their whole feeding into AI has now meant that they are in trouble in other parts of their business. And so if third-party vendors now can't get memory, and obviously OpenAI having bought all of the memory, or so much of the memory, that will make it very difficult for these vendors to get memory. That also feeds into my belief that there's actually going to be either a significant price hike or a drastic shortage of availability. So anyway, look, I've rambled on long enough, and hopefully this is recorded. It's all bad news, I'm afraid. Either way, you're gambling, and I guess the gamble you take depends upon the urgency of your need and your disposable income. I gambled that it's going to get worse. You might have more of an appetite for holding, and it's possible that you would still be able to buy a second-hand system, even if things go really, really pear-shaped. You could still buy a second-hand system on eBay, which would have a relatively low spec. So, or whatever spec, it seems to me that there's quite a market for high-end stuff on eBay. But I think the worse things get, the more expensive that stuff will get, and the price gougers are already gouging in spades. There are just so many of them there at the moment, and the memory shortage is even affecting console manufacturers as well as phone manufacturers. So it really does have a knock on across the whole industry. And I think the best thing that we can all hope is that the AI bubble bursts sooner rather than later, and that the government doesn't step in to try and support it. During the crash of 2008, they said companies were too big to fail, and the government had to step in and save them, which I think is disgusting. They're never too big to fail if it's public money that you're wasting to keep them alive. Anyway, you decide according to your need, I guess, and your appetite for risk. And I hope that whichever way you go, the odds are in your favour. You take care, and a happy new year. Hi guys, one more thing I forgot to mention. I've been holding out on buying a 50 series card because I wasn't happy with the prices. But if I was going to buy one, I thought well, I'm going to hold out for the 5090 Ti. The Ti titanium, I believe it is the flagship card in the line that offers the most power. The reason is twofold. One will probably make you laugh. I bought a 1390, and a few months later, my best friend bought a 1390 Ti, and it's pissed me off ever since. But more importantly, I didn't want a much better card to come out a few months after I paid that sort of money for a card. So the Ti cards have been very, very slow in coming. In fact, no sign of them. But it was strongly suggested that the Super series of cards might come out. Now, Super cards are described as a mid-season refresh. They're slightly better versions of the same cards, often with slightly more RAM, for a similar price as the original card, so 5050 Super, 5070 Super, something like that. And so I was waiting for a 5090 Ti. You might be waiting for, 5070 Super. But whichever one you're waiting for is now being suggested that nvidia won't be doing a mid-season refresh, because there's no point developing new cards and segmenting these tiers and creating this excitement if they can't produce the cards to actually sell. So if you were waiting for this mid-season refresh, again, it's a gamble, but I think it's a fair gamble that they're just going to go from the 50 series to the 60 series, and I don't think the 60 series is coming. Is going to be coming in this next year like you would normally expect it to. So just one more little final thing to feed into your deliberations there, guys. You take care.